Welcome to From Our Generation, where we uncover the ideas and events that shape the world we live in today. I'm Crom Carmichael.
And I'm Mike Hassel.
Together we'll explore the past to better understand the present, because history isn't just about what happened, it's about how you think about it. All right, well, Michael, it is May 8th, 2026, and there's so many things that are going on that are almost earthquake in terms of what I think the effect will be. And there's so many things that I think are about to happen based on things that have already happened, but the effect that you get the cause and now you're going to have the effect.
Yes.
So I thought what we would do is I've heard this term used before, and that is the American experiment.
Yes.
We are, the way that our government is designed, the way our country operates, we are different, and we're different in some significant ways from any other country that's ever existed, meaning also any other country, obviously, that exists today. And so what I did was I kind of said, let's look at what in 250 years, what the American experiment has wrought.
Just one comment before we get going that occurs to me out of nowhere is I think of myself as the experimenter, really, when you say we're the American experiment. But you can make the case that increasingly we're the lab rats because we're being experimented with. When you look at how sovereignty has shifted around and who is expected to call the shots in our country, in our political order, there's a lot of things that are forced on us now.
Well, and those things is when we get into the discussion here, the level of things being forced on us has been increasing.
Yes.
For decades.
Yes.
And now what I'm suggesting is it may be beginning to unravel. That
Hallelujah.
That nature, yes, exactly. So doesn't mean it will, but I want to give some indications a little bit later on.
We can take pleasure in the possibility.
Yeah, there we go.
And the expectation.
There we go.
Yes.
I like that. But anyway, so let's just kind of look at the first of all, I mentioned a few little notes that I made is the United States is the most prosperous country in the history of the world. The United States is the only country that in every time that we have defeated an enemy, we have tried to help it recover. We're the only country to ever do that. All the other countries in the world that defeat another country either exploit them, or well, they do. Exploit is the right word. They exploit them, but we have never tried to exploit countries that we defeat, and this would be especially true at the end of the Second World War.
Oh yes, with the Marshall Plan,
and then also what we did in Japan, and.
Well, that was into the Second World War. It wasn't the Marshall Plan, is your point.
Correct.
It was a different. But yeah, Japan, Germany, and England, France, all were beneficiaries.
Yes.
Of those programs.
Yeah, and that makes us unique in history in that regard, and that's a word we shouldn't use often because it's a special word.
Yes.
But then something else I looked at today, and that is, and then I want to get into some interesting questions for you. But I pulled up today and I said in Europe, the company with the highest market cap, meaning the most valuable company in Europe, is a company called Nova Nordic.
Yes,
and
it is worth telecom company, isn't it?
It's worth $600 billion. That's the market cap. In Japan, the most valuable company is Toyota. It's worth $250 billion. In South Korea, the most valuable company is Samsung. It's worth $970 billion. In the United States, we have 11 companies that are worth more than $1 trillion, and 3 are worth more than $4 trillion. So just think about that in one country, we have 11 companies that are more valuable than any company in the rest of the world. And so the question is, what is it about the United States that allows that or causes that, whatever word you want to use, to happen?
One thing I just want to add to that is, it occurs to having heard that Steve Jobs was half Syrian. I think at least half, maybe more. But he was adopted by a family in California. But his birth parents, I think his father was Syrian, and the Syrians asked, What is it about Syria and the United States that a guy that is from our country, from our blood, accomplished that in America where nobody accomplished anything like it in Syria?
Right.
It's a similar kind of question one of our authors in Knowledge Products said. You look at the American Southwest and the value of California and Texas and what's going on there. It's just a few miles from those places to northern Mexico.
Yeah.
The landscape is very much the same, and all that part used to be part of Mexico, right?
Yeah.
But it's the political system that overlays the land and the people that makes that big difference.
Yeah, that's certainly a huge part of it.
Yeah.
But I want to go back to something else that's kind of interesting. An interesting question. Do you think that that bravery, and that is, and I mean bravery or courage in the face of danger, do you think that that is more or less an inherited trait? That doesn't mean it always is. And the reason I ask that question is that an awful lot of police officers follow their parents in being police officers, their fathers being police officers, a lot of firefighters, a lot of people in the military go into the military, their parents went into the military. And so my question, do you think that bravery, courage in the face of danger is kind of an inherited trait?
I haven't studied this, but I have kind of a split answer.
Okay.
I think the direct answer is no. I don't think it's inherited genetically or physically, but I think it's inherited contextually. I think when you're around people that behave in ways, I know I certainly benefited from being around people in college who were ambitious to do things, and I thought, I think I can do that too.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really environment. If you boil it down, it's not inherited from genes. I wasn't genetically related to those people, but they shaped my attitudes and my willingness to try things and to be willing to fail.
Okay, but you have to admit you might because my next question is, do you think that risk taking is something there's something in the genes where some people are genetically more wired to take risk than others?
I really don't think so. I think it's from being around people, but maybe your parents.
See, I'm going to take the opposite position.
That'll make it a more interesting discussion.
Yes, it will. And I'm not saying always. Yeah. I'm saying more or less. And the reason I say that is height is something that is genetic. Mm-hmm. Intelligence is often genetic.
Can be. Mm-hmm.
And I think that some people say, well, you act just like your mother or you act just like your father. I think that could be behavioral in the sense that you've been around them, but I also think that it could be that it's genetic. And the reason I ask that question is there's two reasons for it. One is in the First and Second World War, the European countries lost tens of millions of young men in those wars combined,
right,
who never were fathers of children.
Right.
And so if risk taking and courage are genetically passed on to some degree,
right,
then a lot of the risk taking and courage that would have been present in Europe today isn't because of those two wars.
Well, the principle still applies even if it's environmental, because those people are not there to influence kids to have these attitudes.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the other one is the risk taking, is that the people who came from Europe to America. At that time, it was coming to America.
Right.
They were leaving something that they knew, and they were coming to, and they were willing to move to a place that would be much riskier to live in.
Yes.
But there would be greater opportunity. Mm-hmm. And so I believe that because we are in that sense, because we for the first 150 years of our country, we were a self-selected country, and the people who immigrated here to take the risk because of the opportunity.
Yes.
And I think that is passed on from generation to generation. Now, if you come here now, if your main purpose of coming here now is to take advantage of our welfare system, that is the opposite.
Yes.
Of being somebody who comes here for risk taking.
Right.
And so that would have an effect on society to the extent that more and more and more people are here or become accustomed to taking advantage of of our welfare system, where they're getting something for doing nothing,
Right.
and the risks of being here are diminished to virtually nothing. And so I think those are kind of interesting. So I kind of went back and looked, and I said, okay, so our country, the first people here, and I'm not including the slaves who were brought here by force, because they didn't self-select to be here. They weren't leaving Africa because the opportunities here were greater.
Right.
They were forced to come here.
Yes.
And I think that question, these questions that I'm asking, especially about risk taking, whether or not that is something that because of the way that we have existed racially in this country, I think that there's some black people in this country who are much more willing to take risks than others. What's also interesting is that many of the risk taking, like Colin Powell, he was not the descendant of slaves. Mm-hmm. His parents moved to the United States to take advantage of the opportunities.
Right.
And Africans who move to the United States legally today and have for the last few number of decades, they tend to be more willing to adopt to the risk-taking American way of life than a lot of other
Right.
black Americans.
Yes.
And so what I wanted to get at is if we kind of go through how our country developed, how the American experiment developed, we fought a war against the British, and anybody who looked at that contest on paper before the war started would be saying if this was a football game, that the Americans are a 50-point underdog.
Oh yeah.
The British had the most powerful,
very much a long shot.
Had the most powerful navy and the most powerful army in the world,
Mm-hmm.
and we didn't even have an army,
Yeah.
and we didn't have a navy.
And speaking of risk, the leaders of the United States, and as they wrote in the Declaration of Independence, we pledge our lives and our sacred honor.
Yeah.
They were basically putting themselves in a position of being found guilty of treason and hanged.
Right. They knew that.
They knew
that, and they signed it anyway.
Yes, and if the most powerful country in the world at the time had prevailed as everyone expected, that would be the outcome.
Yeah. And so that's why I say that, these are people these were risk takers.
Right.
Risk takers willing to risk their lives. And I mean, we're talking about, like, I don't know how many signers of the Declaration there were, but it was at least 30 and maybe 50. Yeah. But it was a significant number, and they were the leaders, political leaders of the country.
Yeah.
They all signed it.
Right.
And so you have so I was getting into the Declaration of Independence, and then the Articles of Confederation. It's interesting. At my age now of 77, I'm becoming more interested in the details of American history than I have ever been, mm-hmm. which is kind of not quite sure why, but yeah. I've actually gone back and I've studied the Declaration. Other people have done that. I've studied the Articles of Confederation, which is most people know what they are, but haven't ever taken a chance to read them. And the fact that people who wrote them and voted on them and ratified them thought that they would last a long time,
right?
And they only lasted 5 years after ratification, yes. is an amazing thing to me. But when you read it, you can understand why, if you think about human nature. And so then the Constitution came along, because the people who were the representatives, the governing people, they recognized that the Articles of Confederation were fundamentally flawed, and so the Constitution turned out to be a new founding document that would set up how our country would be governed, and it was a giant compromise. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't like a whole bunch of people sitting around. They all had one idea in common, and that is that the Articles of Confederation were insufficient. And so then I look at what's going on today here, even in Tennessee, with the vote yesterday, which we'll talk about in a second, in the House of our state house. But I look at how our country is organized, and this is where you get into what I call what I'm referring to, and others have previously, the American experiment. Our constitutional form of government was new to the world at that time, and it's very different from other countries in the world today. And I am fascinated by how it operates, what levers, what it does, and how change is affected as a public policy matter. And I look at for the first 150 years of our country, setting aside the period of the Civil War, and even after the Civil War, when the North defeated the South, the goal of Lincoln was to repair the damage, and to keep the Union. And so Reconstruction was designed not to rule over the South as a captive group of people, but to
reintegrate them into the constitutional order.
The constitutional order.
And he had a famous during the war a famous quote where he said, "If I could restore the Union by abolishing slavery, I would do it. If I could restore the Union by entrenching slavery or some similar
allowing it.
Some word similar to that,
Yeah.
by endorsing it,
Yeah.
I would do it." His priority was the Union.
Yeah, and it's important to realize that when Lincoln was elected, he was elected with a plurality, because there were at least three very viable parties, and the Republican Party was a brand new party, and
so that means you got the most votes, but not 50%.
Right, and that's where our electoral college comes into play.
Yes,
and so he was elected by our electoral college with something less than 40% of the popular vote.
Well, the electoral college comes into play whether there's 50% or not. We had some productions about this in Knowledge Products, and to me, it really bothers me that people think it's a relic of an old time. It is incredibly wise to prevent the tyranny of the majority.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
You know, otherwise, you just have people in big cities electing, and politicians have no need to go anywhere else.
Right. But the other thing that we did at that time and still do is it's within a state, except for two states, within a state it's winner take all.
Right.
So you get all of the electoral votes. So in the case of Lincoln, he didn't even get 50% of the vote of many states, but he still won 100% of the electors.
Yes.
And so it's that combination of the way we select versus many other countries, that brings about. And when I look at the results, I'm saying, remember, we're the most prosperous country in the history of the world.
Yes,
we have we have the 11 greatest companies in all of the world are in one place. And so people who say that our system doesn't work, I ask them, by what definition doesn't it work? And if they get into something that isn't about economic prosperity, if they get into something else, you say, well, you can point to any number of countries in the past that failed trying to accomplish that goal.
Well, there are a bunch of ways that you could measure this that make a place attractive or unattractive, whether it's economics and value of companies or some kind of other social thing. I think, to me, the bottom line is people vote with their feet. Mm-hmm. And where you have an immigration problem, it's because people want to be there.
Yes.
And we have a huge problem with that. There's not a lot of other countries around the world like us in that way, although you must say Europe has a big problem with that because they're so much better than what's available to their south and east.
Right, and they have just as we have very generous welfare programs. So many of the people who are seeking to come to the United States now are coming to take advantage of the welfare programs, and not. Many are coming to work, and others are coming just to take advantage of the welfare programs.
Yeah,
and so that's where I get into the psychological part about inherited traits.
Okay.
As more or less, not always. But then, so then the Constitution was passed, and it was ratified, and so we go along for 150 years. And we've talked about in 1923, Calvin Coolidge gave a speech in which he just said that total federal spending at that time was $2.3 billion. And the 2/3 of that was defense spending, which means that about 700 to 800 million what represented all of the non-defense spending. Well, now non-defense spending is between 5 and 6 trillion, and so it's gone up 8,000 times in 100 years. The size of our government and the power of our government, and this is the part that I really thought about as I look at what's going on now, is that. That was the case in 1923. Roosevelt got elected in 1932, and about 1935 or 36, the Supreme Court flipped in its rulings and started ruling that the federal government, the national government, did have authority that the previous Supreme Court said they didn't have that authority, that those authorities rested with the states.
Yes.
And so the Social Security system was the big first entitlement program that was federally authorized, not by an amendment to the Constitution, but by a ruling of the Supreme Court.
Yes.
And so that would be the first time where you could argue. There are other cases that before that mattered, but this was a turning point. And then the next big turning point in the Supreme Court was how the Supreme Court ruled that the Commerce Clause applied in ways that it had never applied before, which gave even more power to the federal government, or to the government in Washington, D.C.
So let's unpack that a little bit. The Commerce Clause has to do with whether states can have tariffs on each other and how they can control things coming in and out of their border, or whether they work like little countries or whether they are units of a bigger
which they can't.
System.
They can't.
They cannot do
But it had to do with interstate commerce.
Yes.
And what
by definition, it's what happens at the borders of the states.
Yes.
So what happened with the Commerce Clause at the Supreme Court?
Well, what happened at the Commerce Clause that changed that was it was a wheat farmer in Texas who grew wheat that he used on his own farm. He didn't even sell it to other people.
I remember now.
So it wasn't an interstate transaction. Yeah. It wasn't even an interstate transaction.
Intrastate?
Yeah.
There was no transaction at all.
None.
He grew it for himself.
None. But what the Supreme Court ruled is that the federal government did have the right, the authority, to regulate him because they said by growing your own wheat and consuming your own wheat, you didn't buy somebody else's. And so therefore you affected the market. Well, if that's the logic behind a ruling, then the borders or the constraints on the federal government when it comes to the Commerce Clause, there were none. The way that ruling was applied in future rulings gave the national government more and more and more power. And then in 1984, you had the federal government, the Supreme Court ruled that bureaucracies who wrote rules, that those rules could not be challenged in court by the people who were affected by the ruling. And the Supreme Court said in the Chevron decision that the courts, lower courts, must defer to the expertise in the bureaucracies. And so consequently, after 1984, the number of regulations promulgated by various departments of the national government exploded.
Yeah.
And when we go back to our island, we talk about that on the island. We talk about how whether you like government or not, you have to acknowledge that government has a cost on the cost of living, on the affordability or the living standards of the people on the island.
Yes.
Because if there are people who are going to regulate and there are people who are regulated, they're not going to be able to spend their time. Those people are not going to be able to spend their time producing. And other people, therefore, have to produce what they need.
Some portion of their time will be redirected.
Yes. And their portion of their capital.
Yeah.
And that's what we talk about on the islands. And we always encourage people to go back and listen to those first two episodes. And so what we had was through the 80s, the 90s, and I'm thinking back in Reagan and Bush, both Bushes, they were bound by the Chevron decision. So when their bureaucracies would promulgate rules and regulations that they themselves didn't even like, they were forced to uphold them. And that didn't change until recently.
And that's called Chevron deference, and it was overturned by a recent Supreme Court.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so, Roe v. Wade was a very important case in that it's the first time that the Supreme Court passed essentially ruled to apply a ruling that heretofore those types of issues, the moral issues, had been taken up at the state level. Mm-hmm. And at the time that Roe v. Wade was passed, every single state had laws in regard to abortion.
Right.
And Roe v. Wade took every one of those laws and said they no longer apply.
Preempted them with a new national standard.
With a new national standard that wasn't even passed by the legislature, which is interesting.
Right.
And so then you had Chevron, and then you had a whole series of labor law and union specific laws or rulings by the Supreme Court, which gave unions, especially government employee unions, more and more and more power.
Right.
And then you had another important decision that we're going to talk about here in just a second that isn't an economic decision, but it's a decision as to how our country kind of operates. And that is, there was a court case called Sullivan. And the Sullivan court case was a case where the Supreme Court ruled that if you were a political figure, that it would be almost impossible for you to sue another party for defaming you. And so that gave enormous power to the media to essentially say anything it wanted to about political figures, especially, and celebrities in general.
So it's a very broad way of construing free speech.
Yes,
you could say almost
free
anything.
Press and freedom of the press. More than freedom of speech. This was the other part of the First Amendment: freedom of the press.
Okay,
and so media people could pretty much say anything they wanted to, and if it was a political figure, the political figure could not effectively sue them because of the Sullivan decision. The Sullivan decision was a construct that essentially said, if you work for the government and you have powers that only government people have, that you are, because of those powers, the media has the right under freedom of press to say things about you that they couldn't say about a private citizen.
Okay.
Because you had power.
Right.
Now, that's a construct that's not in the Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
It's a construct from a ruling by the Supreme Court. And the reason that matters today is you have Trump, who the folks in the media have said things about him that are in fact false.
They're factually false.
They're factually false. And in fact, Trump made the argument: not only are the things that you're saying about me false, you know them to be false, and so your intent is to defame me.
Right.
And it was that element of it that Trump would sue, and he did this to ABC and George Stephanopoulos when George Stephanopoulos repeatedly said that he had been convicted of rape.
Yes.
Which was false. And so there are a number of cases now where Trump is suing, and the other party is settling with Trump rather than go through the depositions and the discovery process. So there is some changes that's going on because of that, but there's a case with Alan Dershowitz where Alan Dershowitz is suing CNN because they quoted him as saying things that he did not say.
So he's a well-known Harvard Law School professor.
Yeah.
And celebrity lawyer.
And well, not just he's a celebrity who's also a very good lawyer.
Yes.
So in other words, when you say a celebrity lawyer,
I didn't mean to impugn his ability.
He was a very fine lawyer.
Yeah.
And so CNN quoted him falsely, and in ways that he is claiming that what you did was you defamed me.
Right.
And so that case is now going to be heard by the Supreme Court. But one of the lower courts, when you read the arguments that are being made, one of the lower court judges said that the only comment, and I'm going to paraphrase here, and said that the only thing standing between you and a victory is Sullivan, meaning the previous Supreme Court ruling on Sullivan. And I bring that up because what do you think would be the effect if this Supreme Court, because Dershowitz wants this case heard, he does not want to settle. So the Supreme Court's going to hear this case. Let's say, just for purposes of discussion, that the Supreme Court rules that Sullivan does not apply if you defame a public figure.
Yeah.
And also a political figure. Let's say that they use it to say that you cannot defame.
They rein in the scope of Sullivan.
Yes.
In any number of ways they could do it. Basically, they pull in the fences a bit where you're just not able to go that far.
Yes. Okay. And what would that do then to the media and the way that they report in such partisan ways.
It would make them more accountable.
It would, yes. And you and I have talked oftentimes on our podcast about how people do things that they shouldn't do, but you can't hold them individually accountable.
Yes.
This is especially true with bureaucrats who do something in the name of their job, and you can't hold them personally accountable because they have there's some legal term that protects them, even though what they did was demonstrably wrong. The best example for me is in the Duke lacrosse case. You had the prosecutor who knowingly had information that exonerated at least 2 of the Duke lacrosse players because he had video of them being someplace else and not even at the party.
Occurred.
And not even at the party. And he withheld that information intentionally because he was trying to put them in prison.
And I think there was a party where a girl claimed she had been raped.
Yeah.
Do I remember that correctly?
That was the Duke lacrosse case.
Yeah.
Then there was another one that was similar. I don't know if it was rape, but there was another one in the Virginia court, University of Virginia.
And she later acknowledged that she'd made the whole thing up.
Well, she had to.
In the Duke case.
Well, she had to because it turned out there was a lot of evidence that would prove her to be wrong.
Yeah.
But the more important thing is that Nifong, the prosecutor, had
disbarred.
evidence.
Disbarred? He was disbarred because
he was
had
disbarred,
withheld.
but that's all he was. He was trying to put these young men away for 20 years. I don't remember whether or not I know he was disbarred. I know he lost his job, but I don't know whether or not he was sent to prison.
Okay.
And there are a lot of bureaucrats who make decisions today that are political in nature and that are wrong, but they're not held to account individually.
Yeah.
And they harm people. Their decisions harm people.
Yes.
So that's kind of an interesting thing. But what I wanted to kind of go through is so what we have is in the last 30 or 40 years, up until very recently, you've had an explosion in the size of the federal government, an explosion in the size of entitlements. Now we're learning an explosion of fraud and just waste, fraud, and abuse, where certain states recognize that it's in their state's interest to promote or certainly allow fraudulent behavior by their citizens because it draws
the other way.
It draws enormous amounts of federal dollars into their states, and because there's no constraint on federal spending, the budget deficit explodes and these frauds continue. And then you have the most recently you have in the last few decades you've had gerrymandering on a racial basis, where it's been imposed primarily on the southern states under the Voting Rights Act, an interpretation of the Voting Rights Act, which required those states to design districts that would be predominantly black districts.
Right.
And so now that the Supreme Court has recently overruled that decision, and in fact reversed it. Not just overruled it, but reversed it and said you can no longer gerrymander based on race.
They have to be race blind.
They have to be race blind. And then there was another case that said that the Constitution allows legislatures to gerrymander for political reasons, but they can't do it for racial reasons.
Let me draw a parallel and see what you think about this. In a lot of higher education, you have almost no conservatives, 2-3% conservatives. And a reasonable person looking at that might say that is just wrong. There's something wrong there. It needs to be corrected. We need quotas. So we're going to have a quota at Harvard and Yale and Princeton and all of these places that show this kind of pattern, and we're going to require them to have 40%, 48%, whatever number someone thinks applies. That would be the equivalent of what affirmative action was for the racial problems of 50 to 80 years ago, right? But the question is, how long would that go on? First of all, would it be appropriate to do that? If it was appropriate to do it by race in the mid-20th century, why isn't it appropriate to do it on political conviction at this stage? But in either case, how long can that go on? how long do you keep saying you've got to have a quota of a certain number of conservatives or of a certain number of liberals or a certain number of whites or blacks or Asians or whatever? This quota calling, I think what the Supreme Court is saying is the Constitution demands a blind justice.
Well, blind justice on race.
Yes.
It does not say blind justice on ideology. It says blind justice on race. And so that's the now.
Let me challenge that. I think it says the equal protection of the laws.
It does, but it's based on race.
No. It can be applied to race, but it's not limited to race. If you have the equal protection of the laws, if I'm conservative and the laws are beating me up because I'm conservative, that's not equal protection of the laws. It's not race.
You and I are going to disagree that if it turns out that that a university has 60% of its professors or 70% of its professors are minorities of one kind or another, and it turns out that they are denying professorships or teaching assignments to white people who also happen to be conservative, that white person is only going to win the lawsuit based on their race, not based on their conservatism.
Well, the recent Supreme Court case was limited to race. It said you can't gerrymander by race. It didn't approach these others.
No, it did. That's the point I'm trying to make, is that the Louisiana case said you cannot gerrymander based on race. The Texas case said you can gerrymander based on politics. The case in Texas said that. Yeah. Said the state legislatures could do that. Now, what that also does, by the way, is it also means that in New England, where you don't have a single Republican serving in the U.S. House of Representatives in any state in New England, it also means that New England, the way they gerrymandered their districts for political reasons against conservatives,
right,
or against Republicans, is legitimate.
Right.
And so what I'm saying is, this is the part that's so fascinating to me, is how these laws and how our society operates and how the courts are trying to operate. So, for example, another case was, and the decision was written by Alito, where it said that, and I'm not going to get this exactly right, so I'm going to come close enough for horseshoes, but it said that unions cannot force members to pay dues and be a union member if the union member disagrees with how the unions are spending that money politically.
Yes.
Now, states have figured out, the blue states in particular have figured out how to kind of skirt that ruling from a pure standpoint, but other red states are actually using that ruling to greatly diminish the power of government employee unions within their states. Mm-hmm. Florida is an example that recently DeSantis just signed a bill that puts a reasonably high bar. It's not an unreasonably high bar, but it's a reasonably high bar on unions that they have to prove that the people that they represent actually want to be represented by a union. And if they can't prove that, then they have to have a vote on whether or not the union itself gets to exist. And if it loses that vote, the union is gone. Mm. So the union, and so that's in Florida. In California, which is a deep blue state, individual members of unions don't have the same kind of rights as unions in Florida. Right. And so this states' rights, this gets back to our experiment where we have 50 different states and we have different tax codes, we have different union codes, we have different regulations, we have all these different things. And as you said earlier, people are able to vote with their feet.
Right.
So if they don't like the laws of a particular state, then they can move to another state.
Right.
And I think that that's one of the beauties of our country is that you don't have a national law that imposes its will on the whole of people. Because if when you have that, you have no way of knowing if that's a good law or not, because it applies to everyone.
No exceptions.
No exceptions.
To test the alternatives.
Yeah. And so where we are today is we're discovering massive fraud. We're discovering massive waste that's not really related to fraud. We're just finding that some of these systems that we've set up are so expensive to operate. It's kind of like the juice isn't worth the squeeze. But we haven't reversed them yet. We just merely uncovered them.
Yes.
And so whether or not we continue on this road, because I keep going back to the island, is that waste is harmful to everyone.
Right.
And you want your society to operate from an economic standpoint as efficiently as it can, because that raises everybody's standard of living.
Right.
And so then we have now the unraveling of DEI, which is part of what you were talking about, and part we're talking about on college campuses, is that Harvard is being sued by the Justice Department because they are claiming the Justice Department is claiming two things about. One is that their acceptance of students is being based on race, not based on merit.
Yes.
And that many of the professors that they have hired, it's based on their race, not on their ability.
Yes.
And so how that is, and there's always resistance to change. So how that shakes out will be interesting at the Ivy League level. But what's happening at a more practical level is that SEC schools are the number of applicants that SEC schools are getting are going way up. Schools in the South in general, but the big SEC schools in particular. My grandson is going to be enrolling at University of Tennessee this coming fall, and the number of out-of-state applicants to the University of Tennessee is huge. And he was looking at other University of Georgia, Auburn. He was looking at other schools. Their applications are exploding, and applications in the Ivy League schools are down like 20% across the board. Right. And so once again, people are voting with their feet as there's more exposure that in the Ivy League schools, as more and more people believe that the Ivy League schools are trying to teach students what to think rather than how to think. Yeah. Parents say, I'd rather my child learn how to think, and so I'm not going to go there. Right. But then the other things that are going on that are interesting to me is that in the big beautiful bill, there's so many little things in that bill that are going to affect things. Within that bill is states can allow private entities to be set up to collect contributions of up to $1,700, and then that money would be used as scholarships for children who are 300% of poverty or below.
Wherever they want to go. These
entities have a lot of discretion. It can be to homeschool. It can be to buy books. It could all kinds of great micro schools. Mm-hmm. And micro schools, as I've seen articles on these micro schools that are beginning to pop up that maybe have 20 kids and two parents who are formerly teachers.
So it's a financial mechanism that encourages innovation.
Yes, exactly. And the people who make the $1,700 contribution can take a tax credit on their federal return for 100% of the $1,700. So it's a pass-through. And in Tennessee, for example, we have their organizations being set up to do this, and I think it's very reasonable to think that they will eventually get. When I say eventually, I mean fairly quickly, within 2 or 3 years, get to where they have 100,000 contributors. Well, 100,000 contributors at $1,700 is $170 million a year.
And just for anyone who may not catch the difference between a tax credit and a tax deduction, if you have a tax deduction, let's say you earn $100,000 a year, mm-hmm. and your taxes are $10,000. Let's just make it
right.
For math. A tax deduction means that you will get taxed not on $100,000 but on $98,300.
Right.
Right. But a tax credit means if you, instead of owing $10,000, you owe $8,300.
Right. So it costs you nothing.
Yes.
It costs you nothing to give money to these organizations.
$1,700 to somebody because you end up paying $8,300 and it's a wash.
Right. And so I think that as the word gets out that these exist, I think that a lot of people, and I think about in Tennessee, that we have schools, especially in our major cities, that do not do a good job of educating, especially low-income black kids.
Right.
They do not get black kids who live in Williamson County or go to some of our better schools. They're getting a reasonably good education. But there are certain schools in Metro that don't do a good job. Our charter schools do a good job, and we have a number of charter schools that are located in low-income areas. And so those kids do get an opportunity, but there's not enough of them to satisfy the demand.
Right.
And so these educational accounts and this money that's going to be going, and it could be hundreds of millions of dollars, there'll be new ways of thinking about how to organize and create a school. And so that gets back to the American experiment about us. We are risk takers. We want to have competition. Our nature is to have different choices so we can see which works better.
Yes.
And we're unique in that way. If you compare us to Europe, while you have the Eurozone, which is an agreement among the European countries to have a common currency, and then they have common rules of commerce.
Yeah, common regulations.
Common regulations on commerce within the European Union, but each country still has its own ways of governing its own country, and that are not nearly as incentive driven and capital markets driven as the U.S. economy has historically been. And the result of that is there for anybody to see that we have the biggest and greatest companies in the world originated here. As you go back to how did somebody from whose father was Syrian, Elon Musk came from South Africa. So their genius is theirs, but they were only able to exploit their genius in a system that allows it.
Wouldn't you say that there is a trade-off between the priority of safety and the priority of innovation and risk? I
think that's part of it. I also think that the old institutions of Europe, going back to the days of monarchies, I think that undoing
the privileges of the establishment.
Yes, the privileges of the establishment and the power of the state.
Yeah.
Over the people.
Yeah.
I think that that is what the people who didn't like that are the ones who left Europe and came here.
Right.
And so they repelled. Our Articles of Confederation, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, all indicate that the people who organized how our country would be governed recognized how the European countries were governed and didn't like that.
Right.
And didn't want to emulate that.
Right.
And
since then, you've had on that continent 2 huge wars. And so there's, I think, an unusual priority for safety because they don't want to go there again.
Yes.
Right?
I agree that safety is part of it.
Right.
But I also think that culturally, their hierarchical system, I think the Roman Catholic Church, which is a very hierarchical, organized institution.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the Pope is not selected by the Catholics.
Right.
The Pope is selected by a very small group, the College of Cardinals. Right. So, and how they
and the Cardinals are not elected by the parishioners either; they're appointed by the establishment.
Yes, and so
then they pick from among themselves on
right.
who's first among those appointees.
Yes, and so when you look at institutions, and that's part of what we try to do on this podcast is say institutions have a life of their own. And institutions resist change against the institutions.
Yeah.
And so we've had institutional change that's been going on in this country for 100 years, I would argue, in favor of bigger government and more powerful unions.
Right.
I think in the last 10 years, and only in the last 10 years, has that begun to be reversed. Now, whether or not it continues to be reversed is an open question.
Sure.
But that's what we're seeing. And just to that point here in Tennessee, yesterday our state house passed a legislation in a special session that will likely make Tennessee have, instead of 8 Republicans and 1 Democrat, which was a race-based district, oddly enough, the representative who represented a black district is a white Jewish person.
Has been a white guy. Yeah.
White Jewish person.
Guy, yeah.
So for anyone who says that black people can only be represented by black people, Steve Cohen represented black people for about 20 years. And by the way, he did so very effectively.
Yeah.
And so now the states across the Southeast are going to unwind that. And I think the implications of that will be that now you'll have Republicans, and I'm not going to say white Republicans, you'll have Republicans who have a significant number of black people in their district, as well as more white people in their district. And you may have, and I believe you will have, because we have a history on this, I believe you'll end up over the next 10 years seeing a number of black people who are elected as Republicans because they're able to reach out to both constituencies within their district, like Byron Donald has done in Florida.
Well, Rick Scott in South Carolina.
Well, Tim Scott.
Yeah.
Tim Scott in South Carolina has done that. And so there are examples of this. And I think that will be very, very good for the country.
Right.
And if there are black Democrats who want to win elections, they're going to have to figure out a better message or a different message than be beholden to just the Democrat Party.
Yeah.
And that will, and I think that's going to be good long term.
Let me just add,
if it
continues, add what I think you just said, that the left, the Democratic Party has been trending hard further to the left, to the progressives. And I think what you just said is that a lot of Democratic candidates will need to appeal to crossover voters, to more moderate voters who may be more in the middle. Even if they're still Democrat, they may not go along with the hard left priorities, the $25 minimum wages and the stuff that you see from Bernie Sanders' crowd.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what you said is that those guys will have to figure out how to appeal more broadly than to just that base that's increasingly progressive.
Yes, and what's happening, as we talked earlier, is that blue states are losing population. Mm-hmm. And they're losing population because they are not as affordable as many red states. Mm-hmm. And what's interesting to me is the blue states are controlled by Democrats who complain about affordability or claim that they're all about affordability, but it is their states that are the least affordable to live in. And so people are leaving those states and moving to red states. And so over time, especially when they do the 2030 census, the red states will pick up, I'm guessing, somewhere between 6 and 12 congressional House seats from that census, and it may be as many as 14. If you couple that with this the Supreme Court ruling of a few days ago that says you cannot gerrymander based on race, Republicans will now pick up 14 to 16 additional ones based on just that. And so this is going to force the Democrat Party to not be the party of big government if it wants to have a majority, because the blue states are losing population. And
that's just the very opposite of progressivism, where they're digging further into the idea that they're the party of government. On the progressive side of things. How are they going to get out of that?
What they say and what they do are the opposite. It's kind of like watching. I watched last night the mayor's debate in Los Angeles, and to listen to the two Democrats, Karen Bass, who's the current mayor, and this councilwoman who's very, very progressive, to listen to them, they claim that Los Angeles is a much better place to live than it was 4 years ago. They just claim it is, and then they make up statistics to back it up, and then you have the Republican Spencer whose home burned down and who can't get a permit to rebuild, and he's pointing out how Los Angeles is just being destroyed.
Yeah.
And it's just
by incompetent government.
By incompetent government, but so it's going to be interesting to see how that vote turns out. But what is happening, and what he pointed out, is over 100,000 people left the Los Angeles area in the last 12 months. 100,000. That's a lot of people to lose in 12 months.
Yes.
And there's a reason that people leave.
Right.
And that's what the essence of this is. So Michael, we've kind of gone around here, but the key thing I'm trying to get across here in this podcast is the way our country is designed to operate is just so interesting to me. You have these checks and balances. You have the House, you have the Senate, then you have the veto of the president. Then how do you override a veto? And then if the Congress passes a law that is not constitutional, then the Supreme Court can chime in and change that law, reverse that law. And then you have the states that have their own state constitutions and their own state laws and how the Constitution tries to share power with the states. And so it's so different from all the other countries in the world and all the other countries in the history of the world.
Well, when we did our productions on early American history and the Constitution and all that, what I remember is that the founders were primarily concerned with tyranny of all kinds, even tyranny of the majority.
Oh, sure.
And so we are not a democracy to the extent we don't respect just the straight will of the voters. It's moderated through all kinds of institutions to get a grip on, to control the sometimes excessive passions that people have, which we have going on now. You have, now this sudden fire to change representation, and it's happening in all these states now, where it's going to be winner take all, where this gerrymandering is going to change, and it's going to become more like the Electoral College, where you get all of the votes in that state if you are in control. So it's interesting. My broader point was the founders wanted to prevent tyranny.
Right.
And now that we have had tyrannies develop over the last 100 years, these big institutions that spend a huge amount of money, it's hard to undo it.
Yes.
The processes that were intended to keep it from happening now are in the way of
they've been eroded for 100 years.
Yes.
And now it looks like that there may be an opportunity to reverse that.
Right.
And whether or not the reverse continues is an open question. One thing that is happening, I read an article where there are a number of states that have already passed, these are blue states, that have already passed legislation that says that their electoral votes will go to whoever the winner is of the popular national vote.
That's very interesting because I think you can make a case that's unconstitutional.
Well,
the Constitution says we have an electoral college, but how those electors vote is what's at question.
Well, correct, and it also will depend on who the members are of the Supreme Court. If it ever gets to the point where you have a majority of the states, not all of them, and not 2/3 of them or 3/4, whichever is required to amend the Constitution.
Right.
If they just vote to do it, and then you have a national election, I don't know if anybody has standing yet to undo it because it isn't effective yet.
Right. We have those states subordinating the voice of their own voters.
Yes.
To a broader spectrum of opinion.
Well, are different, not just a broader, a different.
Well,
because if their voters voted for candidate A,
right,
and the state legislature says we don't care how our own voters voted, we're going to award our electors to candidate B.
51% of the country that we're going that way.
Right, and those might be so that's a topic that is out there. It hadn't affected us yet, but that's one of those things that could, if it did happen, and you had a Supreme Court that ruled that is constitutional, that would have an enormous effect on the way that our American experiment operates.
Yes.
And so, Michael, I've enjoyed this discussion today. I hope our listeners understand that what you and I are so intrigued by is how are the checks and balances between the federal government, the state government, the Supreme Court, the Congress, how ingenious it is, and how in some cases unwieldy, and certainly people get angry when they don't get their way.
Slow, yeah.
But how effective it is when you look at how well our country is doing when you compare it to all the countries in history.
Right.
So thanks so much.
Great.
Appreciate
See you
it.
soon.